There you are. Yeah, I like that shirt. Actually, that color is nice.
Are there colors to avoid?
Generally,
Just anything in the red and orange spectrum?
yeah, but orange is good
Okay.
because it really.
So I brought a black shirt in case this was not, this golden color wouldn't work.
That's okay.
Okay.
I think we're all right.
I also wanted to put my alma mater on
Yeah,
there.
totally. That's cool. That works.
Yeah. I didn't have a clean UCLA shirt this time.
Okay, cool. So both cameras are recording. Now we're going to go on to social media. Okay, this is going live right now. All right.
Checking your levels. Getting ready for the show. The show's content is before SpaceX, a discussion of startups prior to the current era that we live in. Talking about rocketry companies who had tried to tried to privatize the space market. That's, of course, assuming that we ignore the fact that that there are many companies, many private companies already in space. They just enjoy large government contracts. It's always one reason why I've felt that the new space era was the whole term new space is actually a giant misnomer, because that's assuming that space is either new or that it's being done in a way that's fundamentally new, and I don't think either is the case. So it's a.
So I'll enjoy what you just said, if you can.
No problem. I've been saying it for a long time.
Nice.
Nobody listens, but that's okay.
Yeah, just like they didn't listen to Truax and they spent all that money on
it. It's a little early to judge. I mean, it's difficult to judge the shuttle from the point of view of where they were in the 70s. It was a noble concept to have a reusable vehicle.
Right.
And arguably, nothing has really changed. It's just I think people have gotten more realistic about what you can expect from a reusable vehicle.
Wonderful. All right. So that's live. So social media on Instagram. That right there is the RRS, and right here. Go live. Okay.
All right, Alistair.
All right.
You lead, I'll follow.
All right.
We'll watch the time. I've got 11:50.
Okay.
My meter is up in 58 minutes, which should be exactly what we need.
Plenty time.
We got exactly what we need to get this job done.
All right. Everything sounds good. Let me adjust your mic just a little bit. Put it down.
I just don't want to lean too far.
That's okay. You're good.
Excellent.
Wonderful. You're right there.
I'll keep checking the sound level as I keep saying things that don't make sense.
Follow
power.
Totally good.
Corkboard.
All right. Great.
Spandex.
All right. So let's get our systems recorded in here. And
keep a little levity in them.
There you go.
It's funny how we can laugh at random words.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't even have to be dirty or even.
Yeah.
Just as long as they're random.
Random and fun.
Random and fun. That's right.
There you go.
Random is fun.
All right, cool. So sound systems are go.
All right.
And
cue the theme music.
Okay, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to give it a good 10-second pause before we start talking. Good morning and hello, everyone. Welcome to our third episode of Rocket Talk Radio. Today, we're going to just touch on a subject, something that I was hip to, meeting one of our guys here, Richard Garcia, who's not with us today. He's come down with something, so we're just going to do a short show today. So he brought up the topic of Robert Truax. And since I've done my research on Robert Truax, I've kind of slipped through the cracks. But he was also born on my birthday, September 3rd. So I'm really in love with the guy. Okay, so this topic or this show is entitled Before SpaceX on Rocket Talk Radio. Today it's just myself, Alastair Martin, and Dave Norling in the studio. Dave?
Yes, good morning, Alistair.
Good to have you, Dave.
Good to be here.
Again, love having this guy here. He's full of knowledge, and he really gets to, he's just yeah. So what do you think about, well, I know you know quite a bit about Robert Truax. Let's see what you got there.
Well, Robert Truax started his career in the Navy. He enlisted in the 30s, and he was a follower of Robert Goddard's work.
Yes.
In liquids. He really started off at a great time. I mean, right before the Second World War, he convinced the Navy to continue to study rocketry.
Yeah.
And with liquids. I'm actually not that big of an expert on Robert Truax. I think Richard is by far more knowledgeable. But his name comes up quite often. His name comes up often back before the internet in the 60s. Robert was with the Navy and then later with Aerojet in Sacramento, leading their advanced programs. And then after about 6 or 7 years at Aerojet, he left to form his own company in the mid-60s called Truax Engineering, and he remained there as a consultant company.
Right.
As a consultant, probably the one thing a lot of people might recognize Truax for was his connection to Evel Knievel.
Yes, that's right. I did read that about.
That's kind of an amazing story.
And rocket cars. He was the first, to put out a rocket car that beat the Australian record back in, I can't remember the date, but it was the early days of rocket cars and desert racing and that sort of stuff.
He was definitely a part of that. I wouldn't say that he was the first. I think Oberth in Germany. There was always a parallel effort to make rocket cars.
Right.
Sort of a niche compared to the flight vehicles.
Right.
And of course, the military's early interest in rocketry was probably first in either with sounding rockets and with jet-assisted takeoff.
That's right.
JATO, as the acronym is spoken.
Which Robert Truax pioneered.
Yes, liquid JATO. Actually, most JATO systems, if they are still used today, they tend to be solid rocket motors, but Truax was a proponent of the liquids for their performance advantages, although the complexity of a liquid rocket is much more so than with a solid.
Right. So, as like I said, when I fell in love with Robert Truax, I decided to go back into like his history, his childhood history and stuff like that. He was definitely someone that was way ahead of his time. A lot of people don't know that he was actually one of the guys that sort of actually put, private space out there. He was one of the first guys that actually started building rockets in his backyard and talking about it like he's going to put satellites in space on his own. And because he was ahead of his time, a lot of people thought this guy was like crazy, even though he'd already proven himself in the Navy. With the jet assisted.
Jet assisted takeoff. He was also one of the early engineers in the Intercontinental Missile Program, or the RBM and the ICBM program.
That's right.
Launched after the Cold War ended.
Right.
And when General Schreiber had a team of people put together, Robert Truax was on there. As a matter of fact, at LA Air Force Base, there are pictures on the wall with a young Robert Truax. As a part of that cadre of engineers that they brought.
Right.
The Thor, he had a role in the Thor missile, which is part of which has legacy going into the Delta series of rocket, ending with the Delta II that flew last year for the last time.
Isn't that something? Even he died in 2010. Even up till last year, we were still using this guy's engineering.
Some of his work, I'm sure, was part of it. A lot of people participated in it. General Dynamics, the good people at McDonnell Douglas, which now was rebranded under Boeing, and what is now known as Boeing Huntington Beach.
Right.
Rocketdyne also was a motor manufacturer both for the Atlas and for the Delta. They had a history with the MA3 and MA5.
Right.
But Truax was part of that initial team that advising the Air Force under General Schreiber, even though Truax was Navy.
Yeah, he was.
It's important that there was an Air Force separate, there was a Navy Air Force. Truax was very much on the Navy side.
I believe they started, that one of the reasons why I think they started a Naval Air Force or grew the Naval Air Force was because, of course, World War II. And he also came up with the concept and the engineering behind the Polaris.
Yes, the Polaris was listed as one of his contributions.
Right.
The Polaris, the submarine launched ballistic missiles. Truax was a big proponent of sea launch, of sea-based launchers.
Yeah, during his early days, he actually wrote to Robert Goddard.
Oh,
did
he
you
did?
know that? Yeah. He
did start out as a hobbyist. I really need to read on his history a bit more. I'm gathering a lot of what I know from the Wikipedia article, which is excellent. And somebody really put a lot of care into it. For our listeners, Truax is spelled Truax.
Right. He wrote Robert Goddard, and coincidentally enough, they ended up working together. Like, I don't know. 20 or 30 years later.
Right, that's right. Goddard passed away from throat cancer in 1945. Goddard was a professor, as we know, and he wrote his seminal paper almost 100 years ago, A Method of Reaching Extreme Altitudes in 1919, which would later culminate in his first liquid rocket built in 1927.
27, okay.
And Truax was a hobbyist before he joined the Navy, and so that means that Goddard's work didn't go unnoticed. It was very much rockets were very much a hobby project, and a lot of the Reaction Research Society was born out of that era, because many our founder George James was a 14-year-old boy in 1943, but surely everybody was paying attention to rockets.
Right.
But in the United States, it was considered more of a hobby.
Yeah,
it was considered more of a hobby.
Very seriously, yeah.
Well, the Navy ultimately did. In the end, the Navy.
Why?
Well, because rockets were a powerful weapon. The ballistic missile really had no equal.
That's right.
The Nazis certainly recognized that, although they didn't implement it in large numbers, or at least not enough to turn the tide of the war.
Not in time. Had we waited a little more, they probably would have.
If the war would have lasted
a little longer,
could have been worse.
Yeah,
sure,
definitely. But that didn't happen.
Well, gratefully so.
Not that there's a bad thing, but we all
you
speak German right now, but it's okay.
I don't think so.
But
the point is that you're right. Truax was enlisted in the Navy in the late 30s, and Goddard also joined the Navy. Didn't join the Navy, but joined the Navy's research efforts.
That's right.
In the 40s up until he passed, until he died in 1945. So there's a connection between Truax and Goddard, and certainly Truax was a fan, like a lot of us. A lot of us were a fan of Goddard's work, even though Goddard was reclusive. I know that Frank Molina of JPL was one of the few people that actually got to come over to New Mexico to directly interview with him, and Goddard was very guarded. And he was very guarded just because he had endured a lot of criticism from the press, a lot of wrong-headed criticism from the press. It's funny to me that it was only on the eve of the manned moon landing did the New York Times see fit to apologize for their error in criticizing Goddard during his time. It was only 24 years after the man had passed, but I guess
it's always like that.
Late better than never.
It's always like that.
But we're talking about Robert Truax, and Robert's contribution. He really got in at the ground floor. Through the birth of the intercontinental ballistic missile, and with the Navy. The Navy's had a large contribution to rocketry.
Right.
And leading on to him going solo, I'd really like to explore that in detail. Why, after leading advanced programs at Aerojet, did he go on his own? But I suppose many creative people do at some point. And so we're more familiar with Truax from his latter work.
Yeah.
And
I mean, I did read some more. I did read up a bit on when he decided, or after he retired from the Navy, Um, most people think, and this is no criticism or anything. It's just to help make people aware that most people think that Elon Musk was the inventor of private space and that sort of thing. Doing business in space or doing business for space as a private entity as opposed to government. Well, just so you know, that's not the case, and hence is why this show is entitled, or a part of this show, because this is going to be a short segment, is entitled "Before SpaceX," because people like Robert Truax actually put forth the effort, took the initiative to attempt to privatize space. And when I say that, I mean literally build rockets in his backyard that flew. I didn't fly them from his backyard, don't get me wrong, but he did build vehicles that worked. And he was serious about making it a business. That at the time, I looked at some of those interviews that they did, some of those private interviews that they did, and the media was very limited during that time. But the ones that I did catch, yeah, he was serious about turning this into a private thing. And many people thought he was crazy. Some people thought he would become a millionaire, and he could have, but he was just ahead of his time, and it just didn't go that way. But as you heard from Dave, we're still using technology or
Well,
that he was a part of.
there's a lot of legacy
Yeah.
hardware out there
Of
that's still being flown through United Launch Alliance,
Right.
through their Atlas and Delta, through what survives from Atlas and Delta.
Right.
Now, the purpose of our show, when you and I and Richard had discussed the series of Before SpaceX, I really wanted to seek to correct that misperception.
Yes.
That Elon Musk was the first to privatize space.
No credit being taken away by
no, absolutely no credit taken away. Let's be clear.
Yes.
SpaceX has fundamentally changed the game,
Indeed.
and that is because they have been successful.
Right.
They have become a viable commercial contender in the market as a whole, whereas previous attempts to do so as a when we say private company, we also need to be clear that Boeing and Lockheed are publicly traded companies. And from the very beginning of the space age, there has been private space. NASA does not build rockets.
They don't.
No,
So
they do. They do not. NASA has contractors.
Yes.
NASA has very smart people who oversee those contracts. NASA has test facilities, world-class testing facilities, and world-class engineers behind them in their laboratories and their space centers. But private industries have been making rockets since the very beginning because the experience is out there. NASA is out there to bring the industry along, and I think people's perception of that was very short-sighted. That NASA builds rockets. That's not true. Never has been true.
Yeah. So is it, well, hopefully if you're watching this show, and you picked up on that, well, now you know. So NASA doesn't build vehicles or launch vehicles, so to speak.
You have to be specific that NASA, the U.S. government, our taxpayer dollars go through NASA. That NASA makes selections, and NASA. So in a sense, it's NASA's product.
Right.
No different than the Air Force contracting with General Dynamics, Lockheed, and what would be in McDonnell Douglas, which would become Boeing.
Right.
They also built rockets. These private companies built rockets for the Air Force. They turn over the product, and it's the Air Force's product.
Right.
Same as it's NASA's product that would take men to the moon and would build the shuttle.
Of course.
And so I think what Truax was trying to do was he was trying to make it more, trying to get it out of being such a niche product that only the government would bring people to space.
Right.
And I think that's what people mean when they say, Elon is the first to privatize it. SpaceX tried to go on its own, tried to bring a vehicle from nothing with only internal funding. Mm-hmm. And that's been very difficult to do. Even SpaceX has had to take government money and to make it. But they have made a business.
They did.
Their launch rates is amazing.
Right.
And the recovery of the boosters is something that probably wouldn't have happened if it hadn't been pushed internally by SpaceX, by somebody with vision. The government isn't always. I don't want to suggest that the government doesn't have vision. There are many smart people that have great ideas. and some of them simply don't catch. And as big as the government is, and as big as the industry that it feeds is, there are lots of smart people. Guys like Robert Truax also was started with the Navy, went into Aerojet, and then went on his own.
Right.
So in a sense, I think there's a lot to talk about on the show before SpaceX, just to give people a richer sense of where the industry has been. And although SpaceX is not unique, we should celebrate their contribution in changing the industry.
Indeed. Just to interject, I went to Joshua Tree last weekend with a really cool bunch of people, and we're all sitting around the bonfire just to tell the whole story. And one of my friends asked me, well, what's with the space shuttle? Why did we cancel the program? And I hope that I was able to answer that question accurately for him. In short, I basically told him the maintenance cost and the operational cost of the space shuttle was more than the vehicle could actually deliver. I'd like for you to again expand on that for me, please.
Please don't mistake anything I say for being expert opinion, but I think some of the things that
more knowledgeable than me. That's for sure.
I just do my best, like a lot of our listeners do.
Yeah.
We read, we pay attention because it's a subject we're all fascinated in.
Right.
If you turn the clock back to 1970, Apollo was closing down. Production was actually stopping. They had built a limited number of vehicles because the push was to get men on the moon. And by 1970, Apollo 13 had flown.
Right.
I think Apollo 14 was also went in the year 1970. Please check my facts on the internet.
Right.
But there was a sense in the agency that since the Russians were clearly not going to make it, then there was no point. I've often posited that if the Russians had landed even once on the moon during that time, then America would have never left. It would have changed the game fundamentally, but because the Russians didn't succeed with the N-1 program, which they didn't, the Soviets didn't even acknowledge the program until after the end of the Cold War. It would ultimately spell doom for Apollo. So So if you go to 1970, you're looking at what can NASA do after such a monumental accomplishment in just 11 years,
right? From
their founding in 1958 to putting American boots in the lunar soil,
right,
in 11 years. It's nothing short of astounding. And coupled with that was the military had started rocketry for the sake of protecting our country against the threat against the very same people.
Russian threat.
So
Sputnik.
I guess what I'm getting at is the shuttle was supposed to be that next great thing.
Yes.
A reusable vehicle. Does it sound familiar? Of course it does.
Yeah.
Because the concept of reusable vehicles has been around for quite some time. It's gotten a bad reputation, probably largely because of the shuttle. The shuttle was a noble idea, but it turned out to be technically difficult to execute.
I want to be corny for a second.
Sure.
But go ahead and finish.
Well, I'm just saying that we all have seen the legacy of the shuttle, and we shouldn't be smudged. Having semi-regular access to orbit keeps us active. There were many milestone projects accomplished. It was a 30-year program, but I think people are critical of the shuttle not because of what it stood for, but just because of how much resources it took
to keep it.
And so I think people are critical of the shuttle program because of because many things the shuttle was done to the exclusion of other things. Could we have spent our money in other areas? Should we have spent our money in other areas? I think that comes down to budget, and that very discussion is very relevant today as the SLS is still pushing along. The vice president has said that he wants to put American boots back in lunar soil in 5 years. Which
2030 is what they're saying, I think.
No, they're saying 2024. They're saying 5 years from today. This is coming straight from the White House. Now we can argue about, is that realistic? Is that even possible? Given the funding, I just want to have our listeners think about many of the same. I just want our listeners to realize that many of the same arguments that we're having today were being had a generation or two ago,
right?
And that nobody's any we may be a little closer to getting answers.
Right.
But I guess we're really getting off the subject here of that the shuttle existed for a reason, and
Right.
that even though it might not have fulfilled its promise, it continued. And then why did the shuttle leave? The shuttle probably never was intended to be an indefinite program or even last as long as it did. But it surely did. I think Columbia. The Columbia disaster in 2003 finally forced the subject. But that was after Space Station. Space Station was launched, and that International Space Station probably wouldn't have happened had the Cold War not ended.
Right.
And that under the Clinton administration, under Dan Golden, the NASA realized here's an opportunity to try to bring in the Russians as a partner, give them something to work with us. Noble ideas, but to the Russians' credit, they delivered. The core of the station was lifted. And the Russians still provide access to the station as it's
Soyuz.
as
rides.
SpaceX
Until SpaceX.
Well, SpaceX they
demoed
their vehicle. They're on their way. Boeing shouldn't be too much further behind.
Right.
I don't know where they're at in their launch schedule, but
so launching people is going to be back on American soil, folks, pretty soon. Stand by. Question. Well, actually, not a question. I said I was going to be corny for a second.
Sure.
Back to the idea of reusable rockets. When you said that reusable rockets has been around for a long time. Well,
sure.
It has been. People that know me, my girlfriend particularly, because she has to deal with me watching old movies from the 1950s and crazy stuff like that. The little silver rockets, they take off. Of course, they don't. The science back then was
vertical takeoff.
was just out of there, but the concept
vertical
was there.
takeoff and landing. Yeah,
a lot of those ships back in those movies back that day. That's where the concept is from. But of course, the technology to actually make it happen has just arrived with the advent of SpaceX.
I need to correct you again on that.
Oh, nice. Okay, there you go.
Going
back,
going back to McDonnell Douglas in the late part of McDonnell Douglas before their takeover by Boeing.
Right.
They had the DCX.
That's right. Is that a test?
That was a test. That was intended as a test bed.
Right. Yeah,
that vertical takeoff and landing.
Single.
At the late '90s, it was the big subject was single stage to orbit. Was trying to get the structural fraction of your rocket down to the point where single stage to orbit was possible to avoid throwing away a booster.
The booster, yeah. First stage, by the way.
I mean, there's
probably second stage.
I don't want to steal the thunder of what happened in 2015 when SpaceX successfully, after several attempts.
Oh yeah.
One of the things you have to give, one of the credit you have to give to SpaceX is their tenacity.
Indeed.
Is that they're willing to take on some hard subjects, and they're willing to put resources behind it to try to make it successful, or at least try. Many for-profit companies have difficulty in doing that. They have shareholders. They size up risk, and there's a reason why many other companies have not gone down that path, just because they want to remain profitable. The shareholders get very upset when they're not showing a profit every quarter. But some companies operate differently. Some are entirely private, and they can have that freedom of movement.
Right.
And freedom to take risks.
Right. So because like I said, this show we had to make the show a short one because one of our guys, Richard Garcia, he came down with something. So he wasn't able to join us. He is also a wealth of information, and Robert Truax happened to be his his subject. So there will be a Robert Truax or Before SpaceX Part 2. We're going to go ahead and close the show right now, and there's a lot to talk about, regarding Robert Truax. This guy is a genius. I mean, we're talking, I want to say, Tesla level type of genius. In that, aside from that, like his drive wasn't about money, although he could have. His drive wasn't about getting rich.
I certainly don't think Robert Truax would have minded profiting.
Of course.
Yes.
But it wasn't a situation where he was. That was not the driving factor behind this guy. And I want people to understand that. Was it or was it not?
I can't say. I really can't say.
Based on what I've read. But I mean, I could be wrong. I'm just going with what I've learned.
Well,
I
know that people who go into business want to stay in business.
Of
and the
course.
way to stay in business is you need to make money,
Of
or not run out of whatever money that you have.
Right.
Yeah. So I'm sure Robert Truax was interested in advancing his ideas and interested in making money at it if there was a commercial market to be had.
Of course.
Because he certainly believed that there was a commercial market to be had. And
so was Tesla.
So is SpaceX.
That's the idea behind this stuff, to make money. But before we go into the whole into that debate, which you will get when we do this show again, I guess my point is this is generally not the starting starting idea behind these guys, or behind what I've learned about Robert Truax. It's not how he began. I don't think. I think the idea of becoming a profitable rocket company or going private happened a little later on in his life. And I think for our next show, we'll get into all of those details. We'll have Richard Garcia on the line with us, and he'll be able to expand on the history and the life of Robert Truax. And I am really excited about that. And I would like to also share a little bit more about what I've learned about this gentleman. And just to throw this in there, he was born on September 3rd. Happens to be my birthday as well. Right. He's a Virgo. We rule. And I'm going to have to shut the show out from there. So join us next time for Rocket Talk Radio. And it will be about Robert Truax. And we've got a lot more stuff lined up for the future. So I really hope we're able to, to get some listeners in here that are really interested in science and rocket technology. So with that said, you can catch us on rockettalkradio.com. You can also go on to the RRS and see what the RRS is doing, which is the Reaction Research Society, which is, Dave and I are both a member of.
Right.
.org. .org. Sorry. RS.org. And it's rockettalkradio.com. And on April 27th, we will be having a symposium. Dave, you want to tell them about that?
Certainly. The 2019, April 27th of 2019, this year, in about less than a month away, the Reaction Research Society will be having a public event at the Ken Nakaoka Community Center in Gardena. You can see all these details on RRS.org. The symposium will be a group of speakers throughout the day. We'll start at about 8:45, run until 5. We'll have exhibitors. Listed speakers include universities such as UCLA, USC, Cal Poly, Pomona will be there.
That's right.
Also, we'll have the U.S. Air Force, the Space and Missile Command.
It's going to be super fun.
As LA Air Base is just across the 405 from Gardena.
Yeah.
They're great. They actually have a great public relations group. They do a lot of work with kids, educational programs, the same as the RRS we do. We'll also have Northrop Grumman. Jackie Kaldenak will come out again. We were hoping to have NASA Goddard call in. I don't think we will this time. Last year's symposium in 2018 at our 75th anniversary. It's our 76th anniversary, but nobody really cares about that round number. Ish. But, we're still a young organization.
Indeed.
We still continue, and the industry has grown around us. So the RRS has had a lot. Not all of us are professionals. Some of us are. Some of us are just passionate amateurs, and we try to encourage builders and people who are just passionate about space and rocketry to join us. And the symposium is a great way to kind of meet the RRS, not only members, but also some of the groups that we worked with. LAPD will be there. Indeed, yeah. We hope to have the California State Fire Marshal's Office, which is in the state of California. Amateur rocketry is governed by the Fire Marshal's Office, as it usually is in most states. However, every state of the union has its own rules.
Right.
But we actually have a very good relationship with the Fire Marshal's Office, as California has always historically supported amateurs as long as we're safe and we stay within what's reasonable. As we launch in the desert, we
Try not to lose any fingers, people, legs, that sort of stuff.
It is.
Go through my account. You'll see some explosions and stuff flying and all kinds of fun stuff.
We also launch a fair number of rockets correctly. I don't.
Hey, the ones that explode, that's where we learn. We learn what went wrong, and then the next build, we solve that problem.
The RS works hard to make sure that doesn't happen in the first place.
It's getting flushed.
Well, no, we're here. I don't want our audience to get the impression that we're a bunch of nuts.
No. We're not. Very, how should I say, knowledgeable.
Knowledge is meant to be shared, and not all knowledge belongs with one person, and it shouldn't be. It should be shared.
That's explosions are just for fun. But.
No, I think you're getting the wrong message out of our events. But
don't worry. So thanks again for joining us, and we will see you the next time on episode 4 of Rocket Talk Radio, and we will hopefully be discussing some more of the life and times of Robert Truax. Thank you for joining us. Goodbye.
No, it's natural that you shouldn't go down that path, man. No, it gives people the wrong idea.
All right.
You're not out to blow stuff up.
We're still live. That's the fun part.
Nice little finish. You always do that roll.
Huh?
You always do that roll for your finish. Yeah.
No, actually, it's the first time. Let's see.
Is that I didn't know if that was part of your directorial style, like how Spike Lee has to have a conveyor scene.
Yeah.
Has to have
very cool. Yeah.
Well, whether it makes any sense in the movie or not, he will do it.
That's a signature. Yeah.
He will do it. Yeah. Kind of like how. Kind of like how Alfred Hitchcock could not keep his fat butt out of his.
Yeah.